Okay, so let's go ahead and get started to do the lab. You're going to click on here, the calendar, and then you click on more, and you're going to see a list come up. You're going to have to read through each one of these, and this right here will be the lab you will download. Again, you have to read through each one of these. You will find some of the answers towards the lab report, which is this one that you need to fill in. So go ahead and click on the first one, Lesson Introduction. Once you've gone through the lesson introduction, you will come up to page 3 where it has the student guide. You click on the student guide and it will take you to another link, which is this one. And here is where you can find the instructions on how to do the lab. So right here, procedures. Okay? So remember, you have to read through the other things before you start the lab. But I like to have this open just so I don't have to go back to it later. So I'm going to go back to this tab and I'm just going to continue reading by pressing the next arrow. Once you've gone through the lesson, you're going to come across the lab where it says Investigation, Biological Compounds 1. So you click on this link and it will take you to the lab. And here is where you're going to open up those instructions. And it says, open up Investigating Biological Compounds Virtual Laboratory, which we have. Check. Click on the button View the Tutorial. And then complete the tutorial to learn how to use the lab. And it will walk you through how to do it. Number 4, if you have not printed the lab report for this lesson, do so now. You do not have to print this lab. You can just go ahead and write on it and finish it there. Now, where is the lab report? Let me show you again. Just in case you forgot, the lab report was in that lesson 2.08. It was the last part. So you click there and this lab report should open up. Be sure to type your name in here, and this is where you'll be typing in your answers. I'm not going to do the entire lab, but I will get you started on how to do it. So I'm going to start the tutorial and go ahead and work through the first part, which is the tutorial. And I will see you in a minute.
Many of these chemicals are harmful and should be handled carefully using gloves and goggles. Remember to use clean pipettes when needed. Do not use a pipette for more than once. Place a full pipette of water into the water. Place a full dropper of starch solution into the starch solution test tube. Add 1 dropper of the iodine solution into the starch solution test tube. Add 1 dropper of the iodine solution into the water test tube. Observe the color of the starch solution test tube and the water test tube. A dark blue or black color for the starch solution indicates that starch is present. You have reached the end of the tutorial. You may...
Okay, so if you see here, you will notice that if there is starch, it will turn a bluish, purplish, blackish. In this case, it's purple. And if it doesn't, we're using our water as our control, so it won't have that color. So what do we do next? Well, let's go to our student guide. And it says test for starch. We just did this one, the test for starch one. So now let's go ahead and move on to the test for protein. And this is where we start. So if the protein is present, it will turn black. And proteins such as albumin, so our protein is albumin, is present a mixture of sodium hydroxide and copper sulfate will turn this black. So go ahead and follow these procedures right here to test for protein. Place an eyedropper full of albumin into the test tube labeled test for protein. And now it says test for protein. So how are we supposed to test for protein? Well, it told us in step 1, if protein is present, a mixture of sodium hydroxide and copper sulfate will turn it black. So we have to take sodium hydroxide and copper sulfate. It looks like it's black. Okay, so for this part of the lab, for the starch one that we did in the very beginning of the lab, you can write the color that it turned, or either yes or no. So I'm going to put purple. And I don't write anything on these two because I didn't use copper sulfate or Sudan 3 to test for starch. So I just did albumin. So I'm going to write right here that it turned it black. And then you do the rest for these other ones. Now it says to test for lipids such as vegetable oil. So we're going to be using vegetable oil. You will use Sudan 3 and it will turn it red. Now this one's a little tricky, but we'll figure it out. So place a pipette full of water into the test tube labeled lipid control water. Place a pipette full of vegetable oil into the test tube labeled test for lipid, and then we'll test it for lipids. Okay, I just tested it for lipids and it looks very similar. So I'm going to zoom in. And they look pretty similar, but if I take a closer look, the water is kind of a faded pink. So I wouldn't really say it has lipids. And the vegetable oil did turn a little bit more red. So the colors here can change depending on the computer screen from person to person, but that's the color we're going to look at. Okay, so now we have our lipid, what it's supposed to look like, our protein, and our starch. Now we have to test an unknown and compare it to the starch, lipid, and protein that we just tested to see if this unknown has either a lipid, a starch, or a protein. Go ahead and follow these instructions. Place an eyedropper of an unknown substance into the test tube labeled unknown starch, same but then labeled protein, same and then labeled unknown lipid. And then you need to add the correct indicator solution to each appropriate test tube. So remember, to test for starch, what do we need to do? Well, if you forget, just go on up here and look at what indicator we used. It was iodine. Now go ahead and try it for the other ones, protein and lipid. And this is my results that I got after I added my indicators. So the unknown for starch, the unknown for protein, and the unknown for lipid. So off the bat, I can already tell that one of them does not have either starch, protein, or lipid. Which one is it? And that's where you're going to go into your lab report and fill it in. So for iodine, did it turn purple? If so, then you write it down on here. If not, then you don't write it down. So you can either say yes or you can say no. If you don't really know if it has starch, you can grab the test tube and take it on over to where the starch one is. Whoops, I dumped it out. I have to redo this one. But compare the color to it. This lipid one is kind of tricky. I don't know if it has lipid or not. So I'm going to go over here and compare it. It looks like this is the control and this is the lipid. So which color does it look like more? And if you're having trouble, you can always zoom in. Okay, and then just be sure to write it down in your lab report. So again, for protein, which was the copper sulfate and sodium hydroxide, did it have protein? Yes or no? The Sudan 3, did it have lipids? Yes or no? Now let's go ahead and test milk. And for the milk one, you do the same thing as you did for the unknown one, but this time using milk. So you will place a pipette full of milk into each of the milk test tubes. And then you will place an indicator for starch, protein, and lipid. And you will see if these turned any color or do have starch, protein, or lipid. Okay, and these are your results, or what you should have gotten for the milk, for the starch, protein, and lipid. So in your lab report, you're going to write down either yes, it did have a starch, or no. Yes, it did have protein under the copper sulfate and sodium hydroxide, or no. And same with the Sudan 3. Yes, it did have a lipid, or no. Well, how do you know if it did or not? You look at the color. The only tricky one that people confuse it with is this one, the lipid. They say, well, it doesn't really look red like the other one. So let's go look and compare. It doesn't, but it did turn red. So for this one, I'm just going to tell you, yes, you will put, yes, it does have a lipid. Okay, so make sure you write yes on there. And then look at the other ones. And that's the end of the lab portion. So now let's look at the questions. Number 1 is asking which macromolecules were present in the unknown solution. So write down either, of course it had lipid, because that's the one I told you. And then write down if it had protein. So did you write yes or no on here? And write down if it had starch. So did you have yes or no on here? And you do this for the unknown and for the milk. And what was the role of the water in the test tube? Well, what are you trying to do with the water? You're trying to compare it to see if it, how it does not have that certain macromolecule. And describe the indicator. Well, that was in your reading, so you could go ahead and answer that one after you complete your reading. When you're done, submit it or save it and submit it via Dropbox. You will go ahead and submit it in this one, 2.08 Lab Investigating Biological Molecules. And don't forget, this lab will be due on Monday. Again, one more time, this lab will be due on Monday. Right where it says 2.09 laboratory. That's the date it will be due.